Imagine walking into a grand hall in a Renaissance palace. The walls are not bare stone, not painted in cold colors, but covered with magnificent woven masterpieces, tapestries that seem to shimmer in the candlelight. At first glance, you see hunting scenes, biblical stories, or royal triumphs. But if you look closer, really closer, you begin to realize that these Renaissance tapestries are not just decorative fabrics. They are secret libraries, coded messages, and living witnesses of political intrigue and spiritual symbolism. Today, we're diving into the hidden meanings of Renaissance tapestries, those silent storytellers of the past. Now, let's start with one of the most famous series, The Hunt of the Unicorn, housed in the Cloisters, the medieval branch of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. These tapestries, woven around 1500 in the southern Netherlands, are breathtaking. At first, they tell a simple story: noblemen chasing a unicorn through forests, rivers, and finally capturing it. But scholars have debated their meaning for centuries. Some see them as a Christian allegory, where the unicorn symbolizes Christ, who is hunted, captured, and resurrected. Others read them as a wedding gift, symbolizing love, fertility, and the taming of passion. The layers of symbolism are woven as tightly as the wool, silk, and even gold threads themselves. And that's the beauty of Renaissance tapestries. They operate on multiple levels. On one level, they decorate. On another, they communicate secret messages. Take, for instance, the magnificent Devonshire hunting tapestries at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. They're full of detailed scenes: hounds chasing stags, falcons soaring, noble ladies watching the spectacle. But look closely at the flowers, the plants, the way the hunters are dressed. Each detail is a code. The types of animals might symbolize virtues or vices. The plants, roses, lilies, violets, were not random but carried deep symbolic meanings understood by Renaissance audiences. What looked like leisure scenes actually contained entire lectures on morality, virtue, and even political alliances. Another fascinating example can be found in France, at the Château d'Agay. There you'll find the Apocalypse Tapestry, one of the largest and most extraordinary sets ever created, commissioned by Louis I of Anjou in the late 14th century and later influencing Renaissance works. It unrolls like a gigantic cinematic reel, showing the vivid imagery from the Book of Revelation. But beyond the religious drama, scholars have noted subtle political undertones. At a time when France was torn by war, famine, and plague, this tapestry wasn't just a biblical lesson, it was also a declaration of resilience, a statement of divine legitimacy for the ruling dynasty. Imagine standing in that hall, surrounded by 50 meters of woven prophecy. It was impossible not to feel the weight of history pressing in. But what about the workshops where these secrets were created? Renaissance tapestries didn't just appear magically, they were woven in Flanders, in cities like Brussels and Tournai. That became the Silicon Valley of tapestry production. These workshops were highly organized enterprises, filled with master weavers who often couldn't even read or write but were able to translate complex painted designs, called cartoons, into woven masterpieces. And here's the fascinating part: artists like Raphael or even Rubens provided cartoons that contained layers of allegory. When those cartoons were turned into textiles, the meanings didn't vanish, they multiplied. The colors, the textures, the very medium of tapestry added new dimensions of storytelling. Consider the Raphael tapestries, commissioned for the Sistine Chapel by Pope Leo X. They were woven in Brussels and depict the Acts of the Apostles, but beyond their stunning artistry, they were powerful political propaganda. Each figure, each gesture, was carefully chosen to reinforce the authority of the church. Even more intriguing, tiny details, like fish in the rivers or architectural backdrops, hinted at theological debates raging at the time. These were not casual decorations, they were sermons in silk and wool, hanging directly opposite Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling. The dialogue between paint and thread created a theater of power, reminding viewers of the church's control over both heaven and earth. And here's a secret you might not know: many Renaissance tapestries contained hidden portraits. Look carefully at certain faces in grand hunting or biblical scenes, and you might notice uncanny resemblances to real nobles, queens, or even enemies. It was a way to eternalize patrons, but also to throw subtle political jabs. Imagine walking into a palace, staring at a glorious tapestry of King David slaying Goliath, and realizing that Goliath looks suspiciously like your rival. It was an artistic dagger wrapped in silk. Another key element to uncover is how tapestries functioned as symbolic armor for rulers. In the court of the Burgundian dukes, for example, Tapestries were used to surround political meetings and diplomatic encounters. They created an atmosphere of grandeur, but they also transmitted coded messages. The subjects of the tapestries, Alexander the Great, or mythological heroes, were not random. They were carefully chosen to remind visiting ambassadors of the Duke's power, lineage, and divine favor. Walking into such a hall wasn't just visually overwhelming, it was psychologically overwhelming. You were stepping into a world where every thread whispered authority. And the secrecy didn't stop there. In private chambers, some tapestries had even more personal meanings. The famous Lady in the Unicorn series, now in the Musée de Cluny in Paris, is one of the most enigmatic. 6 tapestries show a noble lady with a unicorn, a lion, and various attendants. 5 of them seem to represent the senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. But the 6th, it carries the mysterious inscription, "A mon seul désir," to my only desire. What does it mean? Is it about love? About renunciation of desire? About spiritual transcendence? The truth is, we don't know, and maybe that's the point. Renaissance viewers loved riddles. They loved puzzles hidden in plain sight. These tapestries invited endless speculation, like a medieval version of a Netflix mystery series. As we trace these secrets, it's important to remember that tapestries weren't static. They traveled. They were rolled up, carried across Europe, displayed for weddings, coronations, peace treaties. Each time, they entered a new context and took on new meanings. A tapestry woven in Brussels might hang in Florence, and suddenly its symbolism spoke to Medici politics. In fact, the Medici family were some of the most passionate patrons of tapestry art. In Florence, the Medici workshops produced series that blended classical mythology with Christian morality, creating a new Renaissance language of power. When Cosimo I commissioned tapestries of the Old Testament for the Palazzo Vecchio, he wasn't just decorating, he was aligning himself with biblical kings, weaving his dynasty into the sacred fabric of history. And yet, despite their grandeur, Renaissance tapestries also contain small details meant for intimate discovery: tiny rabbits nibbling grass, birds tucked into corners, flowers rendered so carefully that botanists today can identify species. These details remind us that tapestries were not only for public display but also for private meditation. A noble lady might trace the threads with her eyes during a long winter evening, uncovering meanings hidden even from her guests. It was art meant to engage, to intrigue, to keep revealing itself over years. So the next time you stand before a Renaissance tapestry, don't just admire the colors or the craftsmanship. Look deeper. Ask yourself, what story is being whispered here? Whose face is hidden among the heroes? What political message is woven into the background? Because these tapestries are not silent, they are speaking, in a language of threads, in symbols that once shaped kingdoms, faith, and desire. Renaissance tapestries are not just relics, they are vibrant witnesses. They remind us that art was never only about beauty, it was about power, about identity, about belief, and above all, about secrets hidden in plain sight. So, the next time you encounter one of these woven marvels, lean in, look closer, and listen, because the past is still whispering through every single thread. If you enjoyed watching, be sure to hit that like button. It truly makes a difference for the channel. Pass this video along to a friend who enjoys a great mystery. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that so you don't miss what's coming next. There's still so much to explore, and I'd love to have you join me for it.